Pocatello League of Women Voters 2022 Forum for Legislative Candidates for District 28 and 29. My name is Lee Hendricks, and I will be your moderator for the evening. The League was founded in 1920 as a grassroots, nonpartisan civic organization just 6 months before the ratification of the 19th Amendment, where American women won the right to vote. In 1976, the League sponsored the first televised presidential debate since the 1960 Kennedy-Nixon debate, and continues to advocate for informed elections and voting rights. The Pocatello League puts out a directory of officials to keep our citizenry informed. There are brochures on the table over there. If you would like to become a League member, and membership is not limited to women, membership forms are also available on the table by the entrance. Please note, recordings of this event may not be used without the express written approval of the League at Pocatello. No part of a League-sponsored video production may be used in advertising or in any way to promote a candidate. The League will only allow audio, video of this event to be broadcast in its entirety. The format for tonight will be as follows. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for their introductory statement, 1 minute to answer each question, and then 1 minute for their closing statements. Tonight, we have 8 candidates running for the state legislature who will be answering questions offered by the League and by members of this audience. You in the audience will have or have already 3x5 cards on which to write your questions. These will be picked up by our helpful runner. If your specific question isn't answered during the next hour, please feel free to contact any candidate after the forum is complete. Candidates, please notice the timer in the front row. She will hold up a card or inform you, yep, there you go, indicating how much time you have remaining. Please be prompt and considerate. I will now introduce the candidates, and you may applaud once they've all been introduced. District 29, State Representative, Position A, Dustin Manwaring and Mary Shea. District 29, State Rep, Position B, Nate Roberts and Jake Stevens. District 28, State Senator, Jim Guthrie and Mike Seville. District 29, State Senator James Ruckty and David Worley. Now, okay, candidates, we will start from our left to the right. You have up to 2 minutes to introduce yourselves to the voters. Talk about the qualities you bring to the position you're seeking and the issues most important to you. Dustin Manwaring.
Thank you and good evening. I'm happy to be here, and I'm always appreciative of the League for putting on this forum tonight. And if the audience present is any indication of the excitement for this election, it excites me that we're going to have a good turnout on November 8th. I'm Dustin Manwaring. I was first elected to this office in 2016, born and raised here in Southeast Idaho in Blackfoot and Pocatello. I left for my education. I went to the University of Utah and then out to Iowa to law school, and then I came back and I started my law practice here in Idaho. I have a business and estate planning law practice here in Pocatello. I have a young family. We have a young boy and a young daughter we had this year. I've been married to my wife, Whitney, for 6 years. I currently serve on the House Revenue and Taxation Committee, and I also serve on the Resources and Conservation Committee and the Transportation and Defense Committees in the Idaho House of Representatives. As I've been working through those issues this year in particular, I've been focused more on taxation, revenue and taxation, and that property tax issue is important to me. But all tax issues I've been focused on in Idaho and how we can eliminate and reduce property taxes, income taxes, and even sales tax potentially. That issue is important to me, as well as our Idaho resource issues. I'm focused on water issues and how we continue to resolve our water resource issues between all different water users in the state of Idaho. And I'm also focused on technology and keeping our cybersecurity systems safe in our state and making sure that we can protect Idaho values and those people that are moving to Idaho. We're not infringing on our Idaho way of life. So basically what I'd like to do is make sure tonight you understand and hear from me that I put Idaho families first. I make sure small business is prioritized, and I make sure that we're not doing anything to eliminate our free and public education system in Idaho. Thank you.
Mary Shea.
Thank you. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this important event. My name is Mary Shea. I'm running for House Seat 29A. I'm the mother of 3 college-age kids, 18, 20, and 22, and I'm also a second mom to my nephew, who's 26. He came to live with us in Idaho, graduated from ISU after my sister died in 2016. I'm a civil rights and I'm a family law attorney with over 30 years experience, and we live in a 3-generation household. My mother also lives with us. I'm a child welfare law specialist. And in my juvenile court work here in Bannock County over the years, I've seen the best of Pocatello, and I have seen the worst. I am acutely aware of what our community problems are from that work. We have a youth mental health crisis in Pocatello right now. We've lost 3 youth just since August of this year here in Pocatello, 2 of them just since the start of the school year. Idaho's suicide rate for teens is double the national average, and suicide is the second leading cause of death for youth in this country right now. We have a cost of living in Pocatello that's becoming unaffordable, and my clients are seeing real problems from that. Public schools are being vilified and threatened with defunding. Maternal life and health is being threatened by poorly drafted abortion trigger laws. The party in power has been focused on what I call non-troversies, wasting our taxpayer dollars trying to defend unconstitutional statutes and addressing concerns that don't even happen in Idaho. The GOP is under tremendous pressure to conform right now. I think my opponent, who is a moderate, I think he and I would vote very similarly on a lot of issues. Where we differ, though, the impact is significant. Free speech is chilled. Medical expertise is ignored. Parental rights are trampled. We need leadership in Boise that moralizes and judges us less and listens to us more. And that's why I want to be your legislator in Boise.
Nate Roberts.
Good evening. I also would like to thank the League of Women Voters for inviting me here. My name is Nate Roberts. I'm an electrician, a tradesman. I've been doing that for over 32 years. I've been married to my high school sweetheart, Kirsten, for 36 years. We have 2 adult sons together, and I've been elected as the Central Labor Council president here in Pocatello, so I'm an elected union officer, elected at my International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers local as recording secretary. I'm used to representing people. I've also, in that position, been working at the Capitol building for the last 5 sessions. And in fact, this last session, I was able to be seated temporarily as a legislator. So I have experience in that building. I understand what it takes to work on both sides of the aisle to get a message across. As a legislator, I would be focused on affordable housing. That's one of the important issues that we're seeing here in Pocatello, as many working families are winding up without a house, without a roof over their heads. I'd also consider that to be another issue that involves property taxes, because property taxes get passed on to renters. And there's something that we can do about property taxes. The other things that I'm interested in, especially, is education. I believe that our education system is functional. It works. The evidence is there. but we need to support our educators and we need to support our public school system. And of course, being a union guy, I wouldn't go anywhere without saying I'm interested in providing good living wage paying jobs. And with that experience, with my experience in the Capitol building, that's why I believe I'd be your best option for a legislator and as seat 29B here in Pocatello.
Thank you. Jake Stevens.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been here in Pocatello since 2010. I got a bachelor's from ISU, graduated in 2016, went on and got an MBA in IT management, and I managed a cybersecurity program for a large pharmaceutical company over Idaho and Wyoming, about 4 facilities there. I also serve as a chief warrant officer in the United States Army. I've been married about 7 years, and I have 2 sons. They're 6 and 4. Some of the things that are important to me have already been expressed here today with taxation. I just want to say that because of my fiscal policy stances, I've been endorsed by the National Federation of Independent Business, which is the largest small business advocacy organization in the U.S., along with Farm Bureau, who represents essentially all of agriculture in Southeast Idaho, and also the greater Pocatello area realtors. So I think that I have a pretty solid grasp on where people are at with property taxes, fed up with the grocery tax. And education's a big deal for me too. So you're going to hear a lot from the Democrat side of the aisle that on the education side, they want more money. Well, state spending on education doubled from 2018 to 2022, and we haven't seen the results. What we have seen is the unfortunate radicalization in some classrooms. Now, there are wonderful teachers in our school districts in Idaho, especially here in School District 25, but some teachers give them a really bad name by broaching subjects in classes that are inappropriate for children or encouraging radical ideologies that are especially harmful to children. I think that we need school choice in Pocatello that offers parents an option to take their children and put them in private school or homeschool. Many parents can't afford to do that, but are still paying outrageous property taxes going towards the schools that they know they are unwilling to send their kids to school to be exposed to grooming, sexualization, and critical race theory. Thank you.
Jim Guthrie.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you to the League for hosting this forum. It's always appreciated and very well done, and I appreciate the turnout and the interest. That's impressive. I'm Jim Guthrie, a candidate for the State Senate, District 28. A little bit about me. Agriculture has been kind of the common denominator of my life since I was 5 years old, and I was fortunate to have good parents that taught me a strong work ethic. But having a farm, I had to work, too, to support the farm, as some of you might know. So I've been a blue-collar guy. I've worked as a carpenter, a journeyman carpenter, and also in heavy industry at the Ash Grove cement plant there in Ingham, and I was a contractor for a while. And I currently still raise hay and cattle in the Marsh Valley area. A little bit about my political background. I spent 6 years on the Marsh Valley School Board, also 6 years as a Bannock County Commissioner, and I served in the House of Representatives for 2 years, and I've been a state senator for 10 years now. My committees in the state Senate now are State Affairs, Commerce, and the Resources Committee. My family includes 2 boys and a girl, 9 grandkids, and just very recently, 1 great-grandson, so I'm very tickled about that. I have almost 25 years of public service in several different capacities. My life experience includes, I've been a laborer, I've been the boss, I've been self-employed, I've been unemployed, I've been a business owner, I've been a union president, and I've been a company man. So I've seen a lot of different perspectives from the labor arena, and I believe that my private sector coupled with my public experience provides me with the skill set to be a very effective voice in the Idaho Senate. The issues I think it's going to be an interesting session, maybe a tough session. The surplus that we have and how we appropriate and how we spend that, I think, is going to be very important. Taxes, particularly property taxes, is a big issue. Water is a huge issue, and it's going to get even bigger if we don't get some winter snowpack, and certainly education, and there are many others. Thank you again for hosting this, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks. Mike Seville.
First of all, I'd like to also thank the League of Women Voters for holding this forum. It's a great service to the state. My name is Mike Seville. I'm running against Mr. Guthrie here as an independent. I'm a Pocatello native, an Air Force veteran, 6 years, IBM Field Service Management, 32 years. I was an outstanding young man of America in 1979 in Minnesota. and an outstanding young man of America in 1981 in California. Rochelle said, "Don't let it go to your head." I worked for Thrivent Financial for Lutherans 13 years. I'm a $1 million roundtable qualifier. I was in Who's Who, California, the West in finance and industry. I married Rochelle Clark of Pocatello. It was a blind date. She knew my mother. 3 children, 4 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren. I built a home in McCammon in 2007. Community service includes the Junior Chamber of Commerce in Pocatello, Minnesota, and California. American Legion Paid Up for Life, Disabled American Veteran, Vietnam-era veteran, Utah Republican Voting District Chairman, Idaho Democratic Party Legislative District 28 Chairman, Idaho Senate candidate 2016, 2018, Idaho House candidate in 2020. I watched the debates on PBS in Idaho in session for the last 5 years, including the committees. The majority of the committees appear to not listen to the testimony given by people and pass or don't pass out of committee based on what corporate lobbies say. Lip service is given. Thank you for your testimony. The citizens' initiatives would not be necessary if the legislature listened to the people instead of corporate and special interests. The legislature passes many laws that originate from Texas and the American Legislative Exchange Council and other special interest groups. The Texas 5-week abortion law is an example. Tax rebates and that sort of thing. I'm not going to go on any further. I'm running out of time, but if you'd like more information, you can hit the QR code and they will tell you, and they're over on that table.
Thank you, Mike. James Ruckty.
Thank you. My name is James Ruckty. I am a state representative from this area. I'm a 5th-generation Idahoan. In fact, my great-great-grandfather served in the Idaho legislature in the House as a Republican. I was born and raised right here in Pocatello. I'm a West Point graduate. I spent 5 years as a military intelligence officer in Europe, around the United States, and deployed in Southwest Asia. I'm a small business owner. I own my own law firm. I'm a trial attorney. I love being an attorney. I love representing people in court and seeking justice for them. I've served in the legislature before this most recent time. I was in the legislature from 2006 to 10, and for 2 of those years as the assistant minority leader. I was elected again from this community in 2020, and I love this job as a legislator because you get to know your community members, you get to advocate for them. You have to do the job well, understand what challenges they are facing, and try to come up with solutions that make sense not only to them, but others in the community and throughout the state. My wife and I have been married for 29 years. She's from Pocatello as well. And we have 2 sons who both graduated from University of Montana. My wife is a public school teacher, taught at the Pocatello Community Charter School while my kids attended there. And she now teaches at Idaho State University as a professor at the College of Education. She is also, by the way, a very good CrossFitter, and I think I owe that to her to brag about her about that. I've intentionally built a reputation in the legislature as for bipartisanship and for getting things done, and I'm hoping to visit with you this evening about some of the things I've been able to accomplish. Thank you.
David Worley.
Name is David Worley, running for state senate here in District 29. So born and raised here in Pocatello. So I'm not a 5th-generation Idahoan. I'm the 1st generation that was born here in America from my mother's side. My mother's an immigrant from Peru. And I love this city. I love this country. I was, raised here, graduated from Pocatello High School, joined the military here at the 1st of the 148th Field Artillery Battalion, did my first deployment to Iraq with the Army National Guard as an enlisted soldier, and then continued from there my military service. I've been in the Army for 20 years, and 12 of that has been on various active duty assignments, including 3 tours to the Middle East, 2 of them combat tours to Iraq, and I have just enjoyed my military career, but then a couple years ago, thought it was time to jump into civics and try and do something different. I love this town, and I think that when we look at what's happening in this state and what's going on in the country as a whole, there are people who want to say that quote unquote culture issues don't matter. The fact of the matter is that societies can survive economic catastrophes even. We made it through the Great Depression. We can survive poor tax policy, but no nation has ever survived the destruction of its public and private morality. And what we see going on right now in our country is a direct corrosion of that. The idea that we would allow children to be paraded in front of adults at drag shows, quote unquote. The idea that we would allow gender-affirming care, which is just a euphemism for castration and mutilation of children, to be allowed in our state. These are being banned in other states. It is child abuse. These issues are incredibly important because if we will not protect the weakest among us, people who do have mental health problems, mental health issues, and they need our compassion, our support, but we don't need to lop off body parts, and these bizarre procedures have been normalized. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. Now we will begin the questions. Each of you will have 1 minute to answer the question. The first question concerns public education. What is your vision for funding a general, uniform, encompassing pre-K through 12 public education? You may also speak to private schools, homeschooling, and tuition tax credit. And we begin with Mary Shea.
Thank you. I'm going to use just a few minutes or a few seconds of my time to say that there is no such thing as lopping off minors' body parts in Idaho or anywhere else, and 3 federal courts have invalidated the states who have enacted similar laws already. Our public schools are the cornerstones of our communities. They provide an important support for families on the edge. One good teacher and the structure and security of a well-functioning public school system can turn a child's life around. The ripple effect creates a better community for all of us. We're truly blessed here in District 25 that they've been able to do such a good job for our students despite chronic underfunding of our public education system for literally decades. $410 million in the governor's bill, which James co-sponsored, is a great start, but we've got teacher shortages, we have staff shortages, we have deferred maintenance issues, and the teachers are telling us they're struggling with behavioral issues. We need to use some of our surplus money to make sure that our public system is fully funded. Thank you.
Nate Roberts.
I agree with Mary. I think that School District 25 is doing a great job. In fact, many of what they're doing is shared across the state. Their curriculum is posted online, and it's copied in many different districts. You know, there's a lot that we have to be proud here in Pocatello about School District 25. But they suffer, just like all the other districts do, with being able to retain good educators. And I think that it would be important to provide funds to our school district without tying them to a requirement on how to spend that. I think our school district understands the needs that they have and the areas that they need to spend that money. And that would be one of the issues that I would like to work on, just so that we can provide an opportunity for our educators to live a decent life here in Pocatello without having to rely on social support systems.
Thank you. Jake Stevens.
A recent study found that only 28% of Americans say that they trust the public school system. 28%. ACT scores are the lowest they've been since 1991. Schools need competition to improve. The fact is they're getting money from the state, they're getting money from the federal government, they're getting money locally from our property taxes, and the district gets to spend it. There is zero accountability. Idaho has triple the number of superintendents and other administrative staff that Utah has, despite being a somewhat similar geographic size. Again, funding increase 2018, 2022 doubled from the state. Do you know any teachers whose salaries have doubled? No. The money is not being used wisely at all, and it won't be. And the horrible teachers that are teaching the bad stuff, the very few of them that make the wonderful ones look bad, will not be fired until they are held accountable. And that accountability comes when the funds follow the student to the school of the parent's choice. That's what we need. Open it up, education freedom.
Thank you. Jim Guthrie.
You know, with the special session this summer and the appropriation of $410 million of additional money for education, I think 330 for K-12 and 80 million for higher ed, that creates some opportunities, but it's also some responsibilities because it needs to be used responsibly. And I think one of the things that needs to be done in education, when you look at the fact that high school go-on rates to college is less than 40%, and that number has stayed stagnant for years. And so what do we need to do to make higher ed appealing to the 60%? And I think there needs to be more career technical education opportunities. Businesses are demanding short-term intensive training so people can hit the ground running and get to work. And I think we just need to diversify our curriculum a little bit so that we have more appeal to more students so that we can get those go-on rates up. And I think that will help. And there's going to be a big responsibility as we determine how to spend that additional money in education this year.
Mike Seville.
When I saw these kids getting off the bus at 4:45, and at various tense location, I asked a fourth grader if he liked, this is down in Downey, if he liked school, and he said, "No, I don't." I said, "Why not?" He says, "Because the textbooks I'm using are 10 years old with torn out missing pages." I met families that were saying they had to buy janitorial supplies. Whether or not this is all true, these are just people that come to the booth. Idaho is number 50th in the nation, this is taking it up, Mr. Guthrie mentioned here 410, but it's still somewhere around 42nd. The average in the United States is $12,580. The highest, like over in Wyoming, for example, is $16,000. And fees are part of it. Giving tax breaks, tax rebates, and that sort of thing to 35,000 millionaires is not the answer.
Thank you. James Ruckty.
Yes, so I co-sponsored the special session legislation, which increased public education spending by $410 million, $330 million to K through 12, another $80 million to higher ed. It was an historic investment in our public education system. Jake Stevens and my opponent, they want to gut the public education system. I want you to listen very carefully to what they're saying. They want to send that money with the students, and it will go to private schools, religious schools, and home schools. And those that are left, the money that is left, will not be enough to properly fund education for the rest of the community and the rest of the state. It will gut public education as we know it. You also note that when that happens, all of those who are experts in marketing will suddenly be experts in education. They will start schools when they don't know the first thing about education. And you will have students who will spend a couple of years before their parents realize that those marketing experts don't know anything about education. This would be a huge mistake, and it would destroy our public education system.
Thank you. David Worley.
So when it comes to education, I echo some of the sentiments here about we have problems with teacher pay and all that stuff. And sure, we can throw more money at this problem till the cows come home. But here's the main issue is that we need market forces in education. Now, my opponent wants you to believe that this means the school system is going to be gutted. It's only going to be gutted if schools are not providing the academic quality and the values that parents actually want. If the schools are providing a good product, then guess what? They're going to keep their students, they're going to keep their funds. And that's exactly what we need is market forces and accountability in education. When you say we don't want to give parents the choice of taking their children to a school that will provide both the academics and the values they want, and also the special needs program. There's a lot of underserved special needs people in our schools who could be better served in private institutions, and also our lower income families who don't have the same economic opportunities as people who can send their kids to private schools. What they're really saying is we want power and control to keep you in our system.
Thank you. Dustin Manwaring.
Thank you. So Article 9, Section 1 of our Constitution requires that free and uniform public education system. So we're required to fully fund and make that happen in our state. That's not optional. We have to do that in Idaho. And we've taken significant strides to do that in the last several years, at least since I've been in the legislature. And you've heard some of the mentioning this year of the investments we've made in education, and we're going to be working, and I hope I'm back in Boise working on how that's actually being spent. I don't think this is an if if or an or situation, or if and an and situation with funding education or private schools. I think we can have the best public education system in the country and also make sure parents are involved in their children's education. And if they don't want to participate in that, they can go somewhere else. It's not gutting public education. We can fully fund and do what we need to do for public education and also make sure parents have a choice where they send their kids to school. We can do both of these things and do it right.
Our next question concerns women's right to health care. What is your position on overturning Roe v. Wade? Do women have the right to make their own health care decisions, and will their provider be safe to treat them? And we will start with Nate Roberts.
Yes, I believe that women should be the only ones really that make that final decision in their health care. Yes, they should make that decision while working with a medical professional. But what are we doing when we're saying that women don't have that right? You know, within my unions, I make sure that women, my female coworkers, are treated equally. You know, our union contract makes sure that they have the same benefits, the same pay, and the same conditions that I have as a man. There's no difference. And that's what I'm used to. I think that women have every right to make their own decisions. It's their personal decision. And the state or the church have no place in making those decisions for them. Sure, they can have an influence on them, but it's still up to the woman on
Thank
her
you.
own to make that decision.
Jake Stevens.
I'm pro-life. I don't think we should kill babies. So someone else can have the rest of my time.
Thank you. Jim Guthrie.
I'm also pro-life, and I'm proud of that. I think anytime you've got something that's alive growing inside of another human being, that's pretty sacred and pretty important to protect. I think the problem has become that the lines have become so blurred, and I think you're going to see some things happen in the legislature this year where additional steps are going to be taken to try to make it even more punitive in that arena, even to the point of disallowing contraceptives and those kind of things, or prosecuting doctors or prosecuting women. I think it can go too far. But the bottom line is I am pro-life, and I think that's something worth fighting for. And it is a very black and white issue for a lot of people. But because of all the iterations that have come up and all of the nuances, it has blurred the issue. And we're going to see some significant debate this session on that very thing.
Mike Seville.
I'm pro-life, but I'm not pro-life. I'm not for anti-abortion by legislation. It's a personal thing with a woman, her pastor or bishop, their family, and their prayer. And it's wrong for the legislature to do this. They adopted the Texas law that makes vigilantes, collect $20,000 from a doctor. That's wrong. And let me put it in perspective. And according to the CDC, there was 23,000 pregnancies in 2019, 1,500 abortions, 300 were married, 1,200 were unmarried. 6% of all women in the United States and men are infertile, and 25% of women married are infertile. Who's going to pay for the $300,000 it takes to raise a child? And 44% of all the single women are in poverty. And if you're in poverty, it reduces to $174,000 a year. It's not right. It's wrong. They need to stay out of it.
Thank you. James Ruckty.
This is a complicated issue. I know there are people who want you to think this is simple and that it's black and white, but it's not black and white. Ask any woman who's had a miscarriage. Ask any woman who's had a complicated pregnancy. Talk to their family as they tried to navigate those issues, especially if they were highly religious and felt disinclined to have an abortion. But when it becomes your issue, when your wife's or the mother of your children's life is at issue, is at risk, Suddenly, this is no longer black and white. We need to understand that and quit talking about it like it's black and white. We need to have real discussions about it. Rape and incest, life of the mother, health of the mother. Why are those not things that are being considered when we have these discussions? The legislature passed a law that would allow a rapist's family members to sue a doctor who performed an abortion on the rape victim. That's wrong.
Thank you. David Worley.
At first, just like to correct that the law actually makes that exact prohibition. If you go read the text of the law, a rapist can't sue the family.
I didn't say a rapist could. I said the rapist's relatives could.
Yeah, so let's just throw everybody under the bus here, right? So here's the deal. I'm pro-life, unapologetically pro-life. And there are no easy answers, but there are simple ones. We don't kill unborn children. We don't justify it. We don't promote it. And they deserve the same legal protections as a child who's already born because they're alive just the same. And that's why we can't just give it this ability to anyone to kill it. We cannot kill unborn children, clear and simple. And I'd like to say this whole question that always gets brought up, who's going to raise these children? What's the price of raising these children? Is it we can put a dollar amount, $300,000 on a human life? This is the talk of the old eugenicists. How do we cull the excess population? And this is one of their tools.
Dustin Manwaring.
I believe that life begins at conception, but I also know when we have these difficult issues dealing with the health of a baby or difficult issues with that pregnancy, we also have that baby involved, and we also have a father involved in that decision. I'm against abortion for convenience, but I also have seen real issues with some of these pregnancies. And so I am a believer in limited circumstances with competent medical advice. There should be exceptions for rape and incest, life of the mother, and also if the baby has no chance of survival. That's my position.
Mary Shea.
Thank you. I was happy to hear my opponent Dustin say that because he did vote for both of the trigger bans in 2021 and 2022. Both of those were you voted for one of them and co-sponsored the other one, and those are the bounty hunter bills. I will also point out that family members of children already born do not get any rights at all, no custody rights, no wrongful death rights at all, but they get it if someone gets an abortion. So that is a disparate impact there. The Idaho Medical Association just yesterday issued a resolution calling for repeal of these laws. I'm listening to the experts. I'm listening to the pregnant people and those of reproductive age. I'm listening to their family members. It's one thing that's troubled me the most about the past few years of lawmaking in Idaho is that the lawmakers are not listening. They're not listening. They're not listening to us. They're not listening to the experts. This is a prime example. We can do a lot better. Everybody in this room is pro-life. Most people in this room can think of compassionate exceptions where they would accept abortion as morally just. We can find common ground.
Thank you. Nate Roberts.
I went first. Yeah,
Oh, did you start?
Yes, I did.
See, I told you. Thank you,
for the
guys.
opportunity.
I
We wanted you to redo your answer.
Want to do it again? Okay, now we have another question. This one is about Idaho's tax policy.
Oh, you can have it.
What changes would you make in Idaho's tax policy, including sales tax on groceries and homeowners exemption, to ensure an equitable and fair burden for all? And what about corporate taxes? You may also address property taxes that are driving some poor people out of their homes. Jake Stevens.
Yeah, I've been about getting rid of the grocery tax for a long time. As far as property taxes, I don't think continuing to increase the homeowner's exemption is the right answer. I think you need to find a different manner of acquiring funds to fund the legitimate functions of local government, which are far fewer than what are currently being funded. You know, there's lots of waste there, but the fact that they can go back and take last year's budget that they didn't take the year prior, that foregone revenue, that needs to go away. The fact that you're property taxes are technically limited to 3%, but they'll go up 55% if property values go up, but they never go down. They have 20% leeway, 10% in either direction at the assessor's office. And I don't think property taxes are the way to fund local government. And I'm not sure what that answer is, if that looks like a sales tax, maybe some existing sales tax. I know the $2 billion surplus that we currently have ongoing year over year is a potential solution for that, but I'd like to see property taxes eliminated.
Thank you. Jim Guthrie.
I'll touch on the sales tax on groceries first. I've advocated for years that if they're willing to tighten up the list on groceries, what could be tax exempt, I'm all for that. But I am not in favor of exempting pop and candy and chips and energy drinks and jerky and junk food. And that's the list they want to use. They want to use the same as the SNAP list and the federal government puts out. If they'd use a clean list and wholesome foods, I'm for eliminating the sales tax on groceries in that fashion. Homeowners exemption, I think that's a limited return on that for the investment. So I think you can just keep raising that if you want, but I don't think you're going to see the benefit to solve the real problem. Part of the reason the homeowners, maybe all the reason the homeowners or the property tax on homes has went up is because of the explosive growth. Homes have went up in value more than commercial, ag, and industrial properties, and it shifted that tax to homeowners. I would like to see some of the surplus used to maybe go back to the local taxing districts to help mitigate and smooth that property tax obligation for a couple of years till we see what this economy does.
Thank you. Mike Seville.
Well, first of all, I disagree with everything you said. And grocery taxes, I went over to Oregon and I was really surprised buying a Big Mac. There was no taxes. And I went to the grocery store, there was no taxes. And I said, how do they do it? Why can't we do it? Why can't we learn from these other states? When it comes to property taxes, there was a bill in 2006 called HB1 in special session with then Governor Risch that shifted taxes. It wasn't really a tax cut. It was a tax shift to all the urban communities away from large landowners. It was a 0.0071% to a 0.68%. And the net result was in Marsh Valley, the state funding for M&O went from $980,000 to $32,000. And that resulted in these 4-day school days and 12-hour days and kids spending, working on, going around trying to sell candy to play in the band. I have the ability to follow the money, and you'll have to remember that when you vote.
Thank you. James Ruckty.
I actually agree with Jim on just about everything he said in regards to the taxes. So grocery tax, I've been in favor of eliminating the grocery tax as long as we do it right, we do it smartly. We have a three-legged stool when it comes to our tax revenue, and it's served this state well through recessions and through abundant times. And when you eliminate one of those legs of the stool, it's going to get awfully wobbly when your economy changes. And you know, there are forecasts that we're headed into a recession. I served in the legislature when we were in a recession. It's not fun. It's not fun. Having extra money and being able to invest in the state, that is something that all of us enjoy doing because we feel like we're improving the state, we're doing good things for the state. But as soon as you hit a recession and the tax revenues start to shrink, you're desperate to find money to fund basic services. And so it's important that you have a three-legged, stable tax stool.
David Worley.
Yeah, so I also want to get rid of the grocery tax, but there's other taxes we should look at. Like we should have suspended the fuel tax when we had these rising gas prices. That's what my opponent claims he supported, but he did that after the fact, after the session was closed. He had opportunities to do it, and he didn't. And then wanted to do it after the fact. I will fight for the issues that matter when they matter, not wait until sessions are over and then try to go back and claim that I supported a policy. My opponent on 3 occasions voted against lowering your taxes on businesses and your personal income. When it comes to property tax, though, we should work at phasing it out. We can do a local option sales tax. We can do a one-time sales tax when you sell your home, or a combination of these various things. What we need to end is this idea that if you own your land, you never really own your land. You're just a permanent renter to this government. And if you cannot come up with the property taxes, most of these instances, it's actually people who haven't mismanaged their budget. They're retired citizens on a fixed income, and they're being priced out of their homes. That needs to stop. You need to actually be able to own your land.
Thank you. Dustin Manwaring.
So this grocery tax issue is interesting because I've never supported eliminating the grocery tax. I've given it due consideration, and I've come a little ways on going that direction, but I haven't gotten there yet. And the reason I haven't is if you look at most individual families in Idaho, most families are better off with the grocery tax credit system we have. So when you file your tax return, whether you pay taxes or not, you have a grocery tax credit that's added. We increased that this year by $20 more, $120 or $140 for a senior. Most people are better off with that credit. We also lose revenue, $100 plus million in revenue from out-of-staters if we don't tax sales at our grocery stores and other merchants in Idaho. That's a big loss to our state. So I'm not there with the sales tax. We can do more with property tax. I was deep in the weeds this session on property tax and looking at ways to eliminate that. You'd have to increase sales tax by about 2 cents. It didn't get legs ultimately, but there will be other attempts to look at doing that.
Thank you. Mary Shea.
Thank you. I think, honestly, this is an issue where most of us at this table agree that we need some tax reform and tax relief, especially now in these economic times. I support some modification of the grocery tax, similar to James's position. I do think we have to do it in a smart way. I do think that we don't want to lose revenue from out-of-staters, as my opponent Dustin said. So I do think that we're one of 13 states that still has a tax on groceries, and that hurts low-income families a lot. The tax credit that you get back doesn't make up for the taxes that you pay. With regard to property tax, I think that's a very complicated issue, and it's definitely not something that the legislature should rush into. That's how the counties fund their governments. And so unless we figure out how else we're going to fund our government, then we can't eliminate the property tax. I do think that if the state pulled its weight in public funding for things like law enforcement, the judiciary, and public education, then the counties wouldn't have to raise your property taxes so much. And so that's what I would work on in the legislature.
Nate Roberts.
The property tax issue really comes somewhat from our education system, the fact that the funding of our education system's been pushed down to the local areas. So here, School District 25 collects about 11% of their operating expenses on our local property taxes. And if the legislature was doing their constitutional duty, they wouldn't have to do that. Not to mention the bonds that they have to run to improve buildings, to provide maintenance. These are things that the legislature is required to take care of by Constitution, and the Idaho Supreme Court backed that up in 2005. But there's no enforcement on that for the legislature, rather than electing the people that will go in there and get that job done. We can do better for our property taxes.
Thank you. Our next question concerns water. What is your position on safe and sustainable water use to ensure that Idaho has quality and sufficient water for future generations? You may also address climate change. And we start with Jim Guthrie.
Thank you, and I appreciate that question. In terms of water quality for cities and stuff, there's a lot of things being done to try to improve that all the time. The technology is getting more and more sophisticated. And so I think that's moving in the right direction. The big concern I have is water for irrigation. When you look at what's happened in the entire Pacific Northwest, or pretty much, with the Colorado River, Lake Mead, and take a look at the Snake River. If you go by American Falls Reservoir, look how low it is. We were cut off from our water this year with a 1904 priority date, and had to actually rent water from the Indian tribes who have a better, more senior water right than some water they're not using. This water situation, particularly for agriculture, and it's affecting cities, is critical. And if we don't get some good moisture and do a better job of managing that resource, we're in big trouble. So this is going to be a big issue in the session. The Surface and Groundwater Coalitions are fighting right now about how to appropriate this water. So big issue.
Thank you. Mike Seville.
I grew up here, and there's cycles that you go through. In fact, I was up to the Eastern Idaho State Fair, and they had a chart of showing drought, and it varied from year to year. This is different. And the streams are are low, and I agree with him. And I also met a farmer down in South Bannock in D26 or 29, and he was complaining about the fact that his water that he's had since 1940 in the family, he was going to have to buy water. Well, he didn't like that, so I called the Water Resources Board, and he explained it to me. He says some farmers don't have water available to them, but in this particular case in South Bannock, they do. All he had to do was write a check to the tribes to get their water that was dated 1900 or 1904 or whatever it was. And so there is water available. It's tough. It really is. Sun Valley the same way. Trees are falling over up there. I talked to a guy this weekend. He told me that.
Thank you. James Ruckty.
Yeah, let me just start, use a little bit of my time to talk about my record on taxes. I don't take a backseat to anybody up here with my record on taxes. The special session legislation included a $500 million tax cut, one-time tax rebates for taxpayers, $300 per family, $600, $300 per individual, $600 per family, up to 10% of what you paid in 2020. $150 million worth of ongoing tax cuts. Now, if my opponent's criticism of me is that I don't vote yes on every tax cut proposal, true, because some of them are very poorly thought out. Some of them would have dramatic consequences to our state. They would gut funding to those agencies that need to be funded. So no, I don't vote for every tax bill that comes along, but if it's well thought out, targeted to those who need it most, yes, I'll vote yes on those.
Thank you.
I didn't know we could do that.
David Worley.
Can we do that?
Yes, my opponent voted for a tax cut that was paired with $400 million of additional spending. So yes, but one tax cut vote doesn't outdo your entire record, especially when you're doing it right before the election. Now, when it comes to water rights, I think that there's, and these water issues that we have, it's going to be a big issue in Idaho. Water is the lifeblood of, our cities and our farms. And I think there's two things we need to look at is there's various ways we could recharge our aquifers, and these are programs, some of them will cost money. So I'm not against using government funds to do things for absolutely essential services, obviously, and making sure we're making long-term investments, this type of infrastructure. But we also got to look at the threats we have coming from the federal government. Unfortunately, even our own Republican congressman Mike Simpson was looking at destroying our dams, which are critical to that infrastructure we need to preserve our water. And I think we need to have a more robust effort from the state government to protect Idaho's resources from federal overreach and encroachment.
Dustin Manwaring.
So we do need to do more for safe and sustainable water. I'll just mention a couple things. We've talked a little bit, some of the responses have been mostly about ag and making our water available for our agricultural economy in Idaho, and that's true, and we need to do more to recharge our aquifer. We have a huge aquifer, this Eastern Snake Plain aquifer, and we can do more to do that, and we've done more to increase the capacity of our dams, and we can continue to do things like that. The other thing I wanted to mention is the other resources, our public utilities. We have $300 million of ARPA money that's going to DEQ for water resource projects. That's a lot of money, and we need to manage that well and make sure that that's spent and make sure we're replacing and making sure we have a state-of-the-art facilities, sewer and water systems in all of our entities around the state.
Thank you. Mary Shea.
Thank you. I agree with what Dustin just said. I also, one thing that I think we're not talking about enough is topsoil and soil erosion control as being a factor that can help us. There's a great documentary out narrated by Woody Harrelson, came out a couple years ago, Kiss the Ground, and it got me interested in this subject. It really educated me. Soil erosion is happening worldwide 10 to 40 times faster than we can replace it. It is the desertification of our soil, and that's what's happening in Idaho. That's what's happening in the Southwest. That's what's happening in the western part of America right now. Healthy topsoil makes agriculture more effective, more efficient. It also traps carbon emissions. It will also help climate change. A lot of our local farmers are actually already starting to engage in no-till farming, which is best practice for soil erosion control. So I would like to see the federal government is already coming online with that. I would like to see our state government support those efforts too.
Thank you. Nate Roberts.
The water issue is a very complicated issue, as you probably figured out by now. The use in our cities by our citizens, the quality of that water is very important. The agricultural side also very important in the state of Idaho. But what many people miss is the tourism side of that issue, because so much of our jobs are in tourism in the state of Idaho. So imagine what's going to happen when ski areas don't have snowpack. We're going to lose a lot of jobs and a lot of money, a lot of tax revenue from from that lack of snow. That's an important issue. Dustin mentioned water treatment facilities. That's also a very, very important issue, especially here in Pocatello. We have a sewer treatment plant that has been upgraded recently, but it's already reaching its maximum once again. That's something that we're going to have to address here locally. And we can see that as part of the growth that we've seen here in the state.
Thank you. Jake Stevens.
Yeah, so I know enough to know what I don't know. I'm no expert on water in Idaho, but I do consider myself a very independent thinker, very resourceful and analytical. So I would reach out to people like Jim Guthrie, my friend Kevin Andrus, Farm Bureau, the Grain Growers Association, and get a multitude of opinions from every side of the issue, because this legislation could be deep in the weeds of something that I don't have the experience or expertise to fully understand. And so I would be very diligent about collecting every piece of information I could, analyzing it, and trying to make a free thinking decision on the merits of the information that I'm able to acquire. So,
Our next question concerns mental health. How would you improve mental health in our legal, health and welfare, and education systems? How would you lower the suicide rate, especially during COVID? You may also address the opioid epidemic. And we start with Mike Seville.
Mental health is really, really a serious problem. There's no question about it. We get sad, we get depressed. When I was in the insurance business, there were people taking antidepressants, and we couldn't get them disability insurance because, sometimes they just wouldn't go to work. And so the insurance company didn't want to take the risk. I met a gal at the fair. They had these people working from the women's prison, and she stopped and talked to me, and she said that the resources that were available at the women's prison up here was not adequate. By the way, women, the incarceration rate of women in Idaho is 5th highest in the nation. And why is that? But she was saying it was very difficult to get out because of the resources that weren't available. And of course, and so it's, as they say, it's a complex issue, but you can't answer that in 1 minute. But I think we need to do more.
Thank you. James Ruckty.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to focus my remarks on mental health issues for our learners, for our students. They have been through something pretty extraordinary with COVID and lockdowns and being out of school and back in school and trying to relearn how to be students. Our teachers have struggled with them. And what you hear consistently is Nate and Mary and I are out in the community talking to educators, talking to teachers and counselors and other staff members are at the school, is that these students are struggling. They need more support. That's why that money that we pass for public education special session is so important. It can go to things like that, hiring more counselors, hiring more support staff, so those kids have the support they need as they go to school.
Thank you. David Worley.
So obviously there's resources that we could commit to helping the problems that we have and that some were created by the pandemic. But we also got to look at what the pandemic did. So we closed down schools, we locked down businesses, we imposed mask mandates. We did all these things that create social separation in our society. Cut people off in their support systems, cut people off from their teachers, cut people off from their friends at school. We isolated people in a way that is unnatural and create a lot of mental health problems. And so I think part of this is saying we need legislation that ensures that this never happens again. And I want to point out that in the middle of the pandemic, when we had lots of families struggling because they couldn't send their kids to school because the schools were locked down, that we actually had a bill that if the school that your kid is going to is not providing in-person instruction, it would allow those education dollars to follow that student to the school of that family's choice that was providing in-person instruction. And my opponent voted against it. This goes back to always supporting the parent's right to choose.
Thank you. Dustin Manwaring.
So there's two main issues that I heard in that question, and the first one was about suicide rates and particularly things that may have come from the pandemic. This is a tragedy that this is happening, and I've heard almost weekly now something that's happening, if not in our schools locally, at least regionally. One thing that we did do, and I hope it makes a difference, is we passed legislation this session to allow licensed counselors and psychologists to be able to come in and be counselors in the schools. I hope that makes a difference. Another thing we did the suicide lifeline. And it's not just a hotline; it really is a lifeline. So that's a new thing we passed in Idaho, and I hope that's used, and it's a resource for Idahoans for the suicide rate. Maybe just use the last bit of my time to talk about the opioid abuse. And we really have an epidemic of opioid abuse and fentanyl issue. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was a drug bust down in Washington County, Utah. 82,000 fentanyl pills. I don't know how many of those would make it to the streets of Idaho, but we need to do more drug interdiction efforts and increase the capacity, roadside testing equipment. There's lots more we can do there.
Thank you. Mary Shea.
Thank you. This is an issue that's near and dear to my heart, and it's one of my platform pieces. Youth mental health really is in crisis in Idaho. And one thing that I need to point out is that this has been true for a decade. The pandemic didn't cause it. I think it exacerbated it, but it didn't cause it. Suicide was the #2 cause of death among youth in Idaho and nationwide in 2016. So we've known we've had a problem for a long time. Fortunately, there are a lot of eyes on it in the legislature as well as in the governor's office. There are a lot of people working on this. There is $15 million allocated for crisis youth behavioral health centers for youth who are feeling suicidal. Those are just crisis centers. They're just emergency stays. It's not enough. We need long-term treatment facilities for these youth when they are not safe to stay at home, when they're not safe to be in a foster placement, when they're not safe to be in juvenile detention, when they're not safe to be anywhere else. There's a lot we can be doing, and I want to get on that team.
Nate Roberts.
You know, Mark and I worked very hard on gaining funding for our crisis center next door here. And I would hope, and I was hoping to utilize him as a tool to learn from. But I would definitely work alongside anyone that would help to support mental health issues, especially people in crisis. I realize that's a late stage treatment, but it's still a treatment that we can help provide. And as James pointed out, this is an issue that we can help our students with. We can give them the tools to be able to work through issues throughout their lives if we start them young enough. And that's something that we have to be focused on and that we can do through our legislature.
Thank you. Jake Stevens.
So to be clear, it wasn't the pandemic that exacerbated the mental health crisis. It was pandemic policy, terrible pandemic policy that forced people to separate, sit alone in their homes, wear masks. I consider myself a very fiscally hawkish person. I'm not one for new programs and new spending. This is my exception. I really do think that we need in every single county in Idaho mental health facilities. Law enforcement has people, repeat offenders in their jail cells that are not criminals. They are in a mental health crisis. They need help. And local law enforcement does not have the resources or the trained professionals that can help these people to get to a place where they can be self-sustaining. And there are some of these facilities throughout the state, but the thing is, every law enforcement agency across the state will send folks there. So if there's one in Pocatello, it's going to fill up by tomorrow with people from Idaho Falls and Blackfoot and all over the state. So I think you need to have a facility in every county with some trained professionals and short and long-term plans to help people get through their mental health crisis.
Thank you. Jim Guthrie.
Thank you. As Nate mentioned, the crisis centers that the state helped fund have helped some. I think one of the main things that we've got to continue to work on is to try to remove the stigma that exists with mental health. You know, if I break my arm and I've got a cast on, it's visual, you can see, you can come up and sign my cast or whatever, but if somebody's dealing with things that are mentally unstable, you know, are they really? I mean, there's this question about it, and so we've got to continue to work hard to remove that stigma and provide that support. The degradation of mental health has occurred over decades with the family unit, both spouses working, and a little more trouble in the family, and so that support system is gone. And personally, I believe that technology and the reliance on a tablet or a machine or a phone has disengaged students somewhat, and really a lot of us as adults, we've disengaged from personal conversations and we rely too much on technology. I don't think that's been helpful either.
Thank you very much. The next question deals with Idaho Human Rights Act. Do you support adding the words sexual orientation and gender identity to the Idaho Human Rights Act? You may address LGBTQ citizens who are targeted with bigotry and violence and criminalizing gender reassignment. James Ruckty.
Yes, I do support it. I've supported it since my previous time in the legislature. It is long overdue. It would protect that particular community from discrimination in the workplace and from housing discrimination and other forms of discrimination. I heard a couple of news stories this morning. One was about a young woman. She was a rock climber from Iran, and she did not wear her hijab, I think is how you say that, when she was rock climbing, and they fear for her safety because she's returning to Iran. And they're worried that she's going to be jailed or punished for not wearing that. And then I heard a story that in Idaho there is going to be legislation proposed that outlaws drag shows. And I thought, what really is the difference? What's the difference? So if you are doing a drag show, you could be sent to jail. If you participate in it or support it, you could be sent to jail. Is that America? Is that what we want? What if you're wearing a kilt? What if you're doing a play about Mrs. Doubtfire? Tell me how you're going to enforce that. Why would the government get involved in
20
that?
seconds ago.
I'm sorry. Stop.
No, I don't support adding that language.
Thank you.
And one of the reasons why is because you see how this language evolves in hate crime laws in Europe, Canada, everywhere it goes. This will eventually be used, and in some states already being used, to directly go after anyone of faith, Christian, Muslim, or Jew, or any other religious group that doesn't approve of these types of lifestyles, and will eventually be used to persecute churches. And we've already seen that in countries around the world and the West. Now, I'd like to highlight here, I like to give my opponent full credit for creativity. Usually, they just call us fascists and neo-Nazis. Now we're being called Islamofascists. A novel comparison. But to pretend that there is a moral equivalency between the morality police in Iran that will throw battery acid in a woman's face for not wearing the hijab, that is somehow the same as protecting children, think about this, young boys dressed up as girls and paraded in provocative outfits in front of adults. That should be banned, and that is not in any way equivalent to Sharia law.
Thank you. Dustin Manwaring.
Well, I'm going to try to tone this down a little bit. That's what I do. So I've worked on this issue a little bit across the aisle and with a group out of Washington, sort of a think tank on this issue that's trying to figure out how to also bring both sides together, because there is this issue, and Mr. Worley raised it partially, which is if you add the words, we have to be careful that we're not creating religious liberty issues. So there may be ways in the future to do this, to add the words correctly. Depends on exactly what it says, but I would only be supportive if we're also making sure we're protecting religious liberty in that change.
Thank you. Mary Shea.
Thank you. Yes, I would support that language. And I will just point out, as a civil rights attorney, I study this area of law. And the Supreme Court has already said that LGBTQ is a protected class under employment law. and they have already indicated that they will protect religious freedom. So I don't think that there's a real threat to that. I also have a lot of concern. I know that gender dysphoria causes youth a lot of mental stress, and it causes them to become suicidal. It's a major factor in suicidality for our youth. And that's why we do have some gender-affirming care that's available that is completely reversible. The gender affirming care statutes that have been passed in Arkansas, Texas, and Alabama have already been blocked by federal courts because they are frankly unconstitutional. Every medical society out there says that this is necessary mental health care for our youth. So I thank you.
Nate Roberts.
I can speak to this from my own experience. I've worked alongside transgendered individuals, and I can tell you there's nothing different between them and I. You know, the quality of the work that they do, their attitude towards their work, their professionalism. I do believe that adding the words will help to protect these individuals from those that feel differently because they've been taught differently or, you know, they believe differently. You know, if they choose to, you know, attack or be violent towards these individuals, which we've seen here in Idaho already, then, you know, they deserve to face law for what they do. And I think that our community deserves a state where we can be who we want to be as individuals.
Thank you. Jake Stevens.
Yeah, actually, I do think it should be illegal to discriminate on the basis of being gay or transgender as far as like renting a place or getting a job. I don't think it's right to discriminate against people. But as far as the other stuff, I think any gender affirmation for anyone under 18, the rapidly growing detransition community speaks for itself loudly, and they are being completely ignored. Children just... There's no reason to start the transition in a child, and this narrative that these puberty blockers and chemical castrations that are occurring, there's evidence of that, massive evidence of that, is not completely irreversible. That's ridiculous. There's no reason to transition a child because they're getting online on forums at 20, 21 years old and saying, hey, I'm going to kill myself because I'll never have my breasts again. I'll never sound like a woman again. I have facial hair and an Adam's apple. And they're tore up about it because somebody convinced them when they were 12 years old that maybe they were the opposite gender. Your brain's not even fully developed for males till you're 26 and females till you're 21.
Thank you. Jim Guthrie.
You know, when you talk about add the words, the devil's in the details. And while I respect individual rights, and I think some work needs to be done in this arena, I'd have to see the legislation, and it would have to be carefully crafted. Because for me, when it goes into the youth, and Jake brought it up, we have minors identified in code because their minds aren't developed enough yet to do certain things, or they're given certain protections in the law because their brains aren't developed enough. So to introduce those kind of thought processes into them when they're kids, I just don't agree with that. And I think we have to be very, very careful about drag shows, about gender reassignment, opportunities for these kids. There's a reason that we protect them in other ways in the law, and I think we have to be very, very careful on this one. This is a big issue.
Thank you. Mike Seville.
I recommend anybody to watch the PBS DVD or get the DVD, 9 Months That Made Me, about a little girl that said she was not a boy anymore, and she convinced her parents to change her identity to being a little girl. Keep that in mind. I worked at IBM with a guy that was gay. He died at 35 of AIDS, and that kind of got to me. Now, when I was 13 years old, I was abused by a Boy Scout master at an LDS church troop in Augusta, Georgia. Fortunately, my dad had him arrested, thrown in the brig, and he went to Leavenworth. He was from Idaho. I had confusion between LGBT and pedophiles, and thanks to neighbors who are gay, they really opened my eyes that there is a difference between LGBTQ and pedophiles. So I support the 500 or the words. I think Otter spent $500,000 in taxpayers' money to defeat that bill. So I really support it.
Thank you. Now for our final question of the evening. This concerns the role of government. What is the proper role of government? And you may consider your position on vaccine and mask mandates. You may also consider eviction of those who need rental assistance and are losing their homes, their shelters, and the crisis that ensues with families in Idaho without a safe home. And the first one on that is David Worley.
So I think the Declaration of Independence is very clear. The proper role of government, first and foremost, is to protect your God-given rights. And then after that, and I'd say much as a secondary measure, but still important, is to provide essential goods and services that the free market cannot provide. For example, we can't have a free market police force. That should obviously be an entity of the state. But this is the whole purpose of the American Revolution, was to show us that our rights come from God, that government's powers are limited, and that's the foundation of our republic. In terms of vaccine mandates, there should have never been any mandates from the government, and we should even prevent them from employers. And we should not have had all of these COVID policies. We need to have laws in place to prevent them from ever happening again. I'd like to highlight that my opponent switched his position on this and voted for a bill that would have suspended vaccine mandates in Idaho. But while people were losing their jobs, he voted against every bill to stop it.
Thank you. Dustin Manwaring.
So I believe in the Republican form of government, and I think, and that's why, frankly, that's why I'm in the Republican Party. It's the party of Lincoln, the party of Reagan, and I believe our party stands for liberty, individuality, and family values. That means that, for the most part, any decision that I make in the legislature, I analyze it, and I'll say this when I close, but I'll just mention this one piece. I always ask whether there's any least restrictive means or other means to be able to do it, to not have government be involved. There are certain members of our society, and that goes to your question about housing. There are certain members of our society that are going to need that hand up. And we have a responsibility and obligation to make sure that they do, and we take care of them. And we do that here in Pocatello, and we do that in Idaho, and we do it well. But we need to continue to make sure we're adequately making sure there's housing for our population that doesn't and can't afford it, and our homeless population. That's on the uptick in our state, and we can do more.
Thank you. Mary Shea.
Thank you. Self-determination and self-responsibility, those are core values for me, and I think they're core values for most of you. I think they're core values for most Idahoans. I do believe in small government. I do believe that government needs to stay in its lane, and I don't think that our legislature in Boise has done that very well over the past few years. I think the role of government is to support us when we need support, to use our taxpayer money wisely and not to waste it. I think that their role is not to divide us, it's to unite us. It's not to tear us down, and it's definitely not to silence us. It's not to violate our civil rights. Too often, the legislature has been passing laws that frankly violate our First Amendment rights. They silence us, they shut us up, and it's not right. I agree, we have a looming housing crisis in Pocatello, Idaho, caused in part by the uptick in housing values, and we need to be ready for that. We need leaders in Boise who understand that crisis, who know the players, who know the teams, and know how to solve that problem. Thank you.
Thanks. Nate Roberts.
The role of government is, has been pointed out, right, well documented in our Constitution, and that is to provide for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But there's another term there that often gets missed, and that is to provide for the common good. You know, that is that hand up when we need it. You know, providing a place for us to live when we're homeless. You know, these are the issues that government is supposed to step in to protect us and to provide for us when we cannot provide for ourselves. That doesn't mean provide for us eternally, but to provide for us until we have an opportunity on our own. That common good is important, and that's something that I would work towards to make sure that we float all boats in our economy and in our state, to make sure that when we all do better, that we all do better.
Thank you. Jake Stevens.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up, Nate, and I would respectfully disagree with a part of that point. So to me, the common good clause has been used so frequently, basically to pass unconstitutional legislation that supposedly lifts all boats, right? It's the pursuit of happiness. Government doesn't provide you with happiness, property, etc. When Davy Crockett was a congressman, there's this famous quote. He said, for every one disadvantaged person that government provides funding or resources to, they've taken away from 3 more needing people to provide that to them. And so I think using the common good clause to just say, hey, let's, give Obama phones and Section 8 housing to everybody, keep them on food stamps because, in some cases they're defrauding the system, don't want to work. I'm not saying everybody, but I think that there's been far too much of that. And I think that it's the pursuit of happiness, and you have that right, and I'll protect that right.
Thank you. Jim Guthrie.
I'll touch briefly on the vaccine mandate. I don't think there should have been one. I think that should have been an individual choice and not a mandate. As far as the role of government, the old saying, only do those things that the people can't reasonably do for themselves. And you've heard those saying also, hand up, not a handout. And I think that needs to be part of the consideration. When you look at the economy of scale, there are certain things that the private sector, the people, individual people can't do. Police, fire, road infrastructure, schools, courts, and there's just a lot of things that wouldn't make sense to try to do without some kind of funding or some kind of structure from our government. But I think most importantly, the role of government and the role of government as we seek to fill those offices is to listen to the people and listen to what they want and try to make the best decisions for our district and for our state. Thank you.
Thanks. Mike Seville.
First of all, I had polio when I was 9 years old before the vaccine came out, and I spent about 5 years trying to recover from that with 140-degree hot baths for a year. It wasn't very much fun. When this happened, we actually toured China, and we got off of a train, and a lady was down at the end of the ramp testing everyone with one of these. This was 10 years ago, with a thing to check your temperature and a mask, and I didn't understand it. In February of 2020, I saw this, and we went to a nursing home that had 66,000 residents. And in 2020, we saw this nursing home, the doors were being welded shut because they wanted to keep the seniors from running or going outside and infecting. There's 23,000 of these little viruses on a head of a pin, and people really don't understand in depth. And I spent 3 years in Rochester, Minnesota at the Mayo Clinic. And I will say this, the vaccines do work, and we have 5 shots. And as far as all these mandates and that sort of thing, probably not right, but people aren't making the right decision when it comes to these diseases.
Thank you. James Ruchti.
Thank you. This is probably the biggest difference between my opponent and me. I believe in limited government. I believe that individuals should make the decisions they need to make for themselves and their families and their businesses. My opponent wants to use government to dictate what books your kids read, what books belong on library shelves. He wants to use government to second-guess decisions that small business people and large corporations make in the state of Idaho if they offend some principle that's important to him. He wants to make sure that your kids only join clubs that he finds appropriate. And if your health decisions offend his morality, then he wants to control that as well. He wants the government to step in and make those decisions for you, even though he doesn't know what the individual situations are, even though he doesn't know what parents want to do with their kids and how they want to raise them. The role of government should be limited. It should not be what my opponent wants to use it for.
Thank you. I would like to thank all the candidates for their answers and all of you in the audience for your questions. I had a side note here. I apologize I could not get to all the questions, but again, you can talk to the candidates themselves. Now we offer each candidate the chance for a 1-minute closing statement. This time, we will start from this end with David Worley.
A Democrat who says it for limited government. Never thought I'd hear the day. All right, so we had the economic lockdowns. We had bills to end them. My opponent voted against them. We had bills to restrict the governor's power to impose mandates during the pandemic. He voted against them. We had bills to end vaccine mandates. He voted against them. We had bills to end mask mandates. He voted against them. And now he's trying to say that because I don't want pornography in libraries, I don't want pornography in our schools, I don't want the teaching of radical gender ideology in our schools, or the teaching of critical race theory does nothing but divide and demonize people and demonize our own nation's history, that because I don't want these things, that makes me some sort of Sharia law totalitarian. Well, call me old-fashioned. I believe in the same principles of our founding fathers, and I will defend them.
Thank you. James Ruckty.
The job of a legislator is to get things done. It's not to create controversy. It's not to make up fake problems like CRT. That's fake. It's not to say there's porn in libraries. That's fake. It's not to talk about radical gender ideology. That's fake. These things keep our legislator from being able to get real things done. Every day we spend on these issues, we spend way too many days on them, is a day we're not working on property tax relief. It's a day we're not working on solving our staffing issues at our public schools. It's a day we're not addressing broadband and other infrastructure challenges. We have plenty of real problems to solve. We don't need to spend time on fake ones.
Thank you. Mike Seville.
I agree with him. Service to others is part of my DNA. I was a military dependent from age 9 to 18, living in 3 states, Idaho, Illinois, Georgia, and the Panama Canal Zone. I attended school in 6 different communities. I enlisted in the Air Force, and 3 months later, the Cuban Missile Crisis. After 9 months of electronic training, I was assigned to Germany, where the bomber I was trained were loaded with nuclear bombs to stop the Soviet tanks on the East German border. There were no bomb shelters. I consider those 6 years military service to my country. I was asked to run for the Idaho Senate in 2016 by Mark Nye. He knew that I couldn't understand why my neighbor's kids were getting on the bus at 6:30 in the morning and getting off the bus at 4:45 in the evening, 4 days a week. And so I asked him if he thought I could help bring back 5-day school weeks. And Mark replied, "If you can get elected." I accepted Mark's encouragement. I consider running for office civic responsibility to my country. Thank you.
Thanks. Jim Guthrie.
You know, the 23 session will see at least 20 new senators and 40 or more new House members. And there's going to need to be some continuity with some past experience going forward. But that alone isn't enough just to elect me again to go to the Senate. I agree with that. But I will tell you that I'm a good listener, I'm fair, I'm conservative, but I employ common sense and sound judgment to policy setting and problem solving in Boise, and I have a track record of doing that. I've worked hard during my 12 years and would be honored to have that support again and be able to continue in that capacity. So I would appreciate your support and vote for Jim Guthrie on November 8th for the Idaho Senate. Thank you. And I appreciate again the league holding this forum and allowing us to come and talk about the issues. Thank you.
Jake Stevens.
So I get the feeling there aren't many undecided voters that came here tonight, just based on the reactions when people say certain things. But I guess what I want people to know about me is that I care deeply about the people of my community. On any policy whatsoever, I come from a place of care for people. Even if you hate my guts, my goal is to protect your individual rights that don't infringe on the rights of someone else. I pick up the phone. I'm very transparent. I recently published my personal cell phone number in the newspaper. So if you want to have a good faith discussion about anything, even if you do hate my guts, please give me a call. Let's talk. I want to do a good job for this town. I feel like we've been represented for a long time by Democrats with voting records that are nowhere near the values of this community. I mean, Nate's a real nice guy. I've gotten to know him a bit, and I like Nate. Nate supported Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is an avowed socialist. That's not us. That's not Pocatello. We're not Portland. Come on.
Thank you. Nate Roberts.
So as an electrician, I've learned the trade of troubleshooting. And that's not necessarily always specific to just electrical systems. Though that same systems of troubleshooting can be used in the legislature, and that's one of the things that I plan on being able to apply there. I have worked in the legislature, I've worked with legislators, and I've worked and spoke with the governor on some issues. I am experienced in this, and I don't think that my opponent has that same experience. I would appreciate your vote. I appreciate your support. I think that I could be a good representative for you and represent everybody, regardless if I supported Bernie Sanders in 2016 or not.
And 2020, Nate, come on.
I didn't campaign for him, and
We've got the
but it
receipts.
doesn't mean that I'm an avowed socialist either. I'm not a capitalist for that matter either. So, but I thank you for your time and thank the League for inviting us all here.
Mary Shea.
Thank you. Thank you again to the League for having us. This is what democracy is all about. And that's what we've been doing on the campaign trail. James, Nate, and I have been going out, knocking on doors, going to events, talking to people, talking to educators, talking to doctors, talking to the people who are invested in the problems that are facing the community, because we really want to understand what the issues are before we start legislating about them. I think that I'm a moderate Democrat. I think that my opposing opposition is, yes, I'm sorry, Dustin. I'm just going to say Dustin. How about that? I think he's a moderate Republican. And I think that we will vote the same in a lot of cases. But unfortunately, there is a far-right movement in Idaho, and they have already passed 2 laws that violate your First Amendment rights. They tried to pass a third one. It didn't pass. It got put in the Senate drawer, but it probably will be resurrected next year. I'm tired of Idaho passing unconstitutional laws and you spending your taxpayer dollars trying to defend them and losing every single time. Thank you.
Dustin Manwaring.
Thank you to the League and for all of you for being here tonight. So I like to use the word reasonable, and I believe that I can be a reasonable Republican, and a Republican can be the most reasonable person in the room. I truly do believe that. I approach policy decisions by 3 core principles. I ask, is it good for Idaho families? I ask, does it support small business? And I ask whether government has to be involved. Every single decision I make, I ask myself those 3 questions, and I stand by them. Our community is diverse. This room is evidence of that. It really, truly is an honor for me to represent each of you and to be your representative and serve you in Boise. Most of you know me and you know my record. I spend my time in the details. I spend my time trying to find compromise and making incremental steps to make Idaho a better place to live. My record is clear, and I have a record to stand on, and I have a reputation to stand on. And I just ask for your vote on November 8th to help return me back to Boise to continue to represent you and from District 29 in Pocatello. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank all of you. This completes our forum for state legislative candidates for District 28 and District 29. You've been very patient, but I do have a couple of announcements. This forum and the one on October 11 for Bannock County candidates were recorded and will be available for you viewing. Actually, the one tonight is going out live. You can look for those websites on this podium right at the end of the table here. It'll also be on Pocatello Media Cable, Channel 56.
Hi, Mom.
I'd like to announce that Idaho Public TV will air the following 2 debates. Monday, October 24th at 8 p.m., Debbie Critchfield and Terry Gilbert will debate for the position of Idaho Superintendent of Public Instruction. Friday, October 28th at 8 p.m., Scott Bedke and Terry Pickens Manweiler will debate for the position of Idaho Lieutenant Governor. Don't forget to vote. November 8th is Election Day. Early voting has already begun at the Bannock County Elections Office. But please plan ahead. They close their doors at 4:30, so don't come late. Thank you again for participating. Have a good evening, everyone.